All right, everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we are with an old friend of mine that I've known for many, many, many years, Baruch Ellsworth, and we are going to talk about leadership and accountability in high stress environments, which I got to say is like one of the coolest conversations that I think you can have with someone. And I'm really excited to have Baruch on the show. So, my man, welcome to the show.
Hey there. Long time to see.
Yeah. Okay. So let's hop into it, man. Leadership and accountability in high stress environments. What does that mean for you personally and professionally?
Well, professionally, it says what it is. It's leadership and accountability in any situation. And this happens to be a high stress where in my profession, it's delivering a high level of hospitality and performance daily. With a few days off here and there, but it's a practice that we get to repeat over and over again for many years and get better at it and better at it. And that's where I'm coming from. About 20 solid years of cooking, and most of those years in high-end fine dining kind of establishments. Personally, it means to me a real journey in like understanding yourself and understanding your inequalities, as well as your, the things that you can bring to the table, as far as managing people, because after a while, because of the repetitious nature, we're able to hone our craft to a certain degree where it's second nature. Now, we're always learning, but at a certain point, your standard is your standard, and that's what you've learned over the years. And in my case, it's a high standard. I hope it's a high standard. So personally, it's a journey, like I said, to understand, where you're failing in life and where you're, how you're going to get better at that and how you're going to like bring others up to that standard. Because you're nothing without the people around you, and you have to stop and appreciate that. And I think in my business, a lot of us get to a point of management where all of a sudden we're in charge of a team, we're the most influential, all of a sudden you're the one with the most experience, and you have to step back and realize that and understand the power that has in people's lives, because they're all looking to you, and hopefully they want to be you, at least in part, if not in whole, hopefully not in whole. They want to emulate you. They want to get the experience that you've gotten over your years, and you have to appreciate that they're all looking at you.
Okay, man, there's so much there I want to unpack. So, just for our audience, like as I said in our intro, you've got a really significant wealth of experience in the fine dining industry, and I think like even people who are relatively unfamiliar with what that looks like have heard or can at least guess that there's a lot of pressure in that industry. What can you tell us about being in these high stress, high pressure environments that's really unique to a kitchen environment?
Well, at first you get thrown in there, and it's kind of exciting. You have to be willing to commit yourself 100% to it. It gives back an incredible amount of wealth of knowledge, but it takes time to be able to absorb all that. And when you get thrown in there, you just don't know. You're asked from your elbow. You're sinking or swimming. 8 hours goes by like 20 minutes, and before you know it, there's 2 days have gone by. You haven't eaten. You slept maybe 20 minutes or 2 hours, and that's the beginning because you're very excited and you're very young and you're very just very excited. The pressure hopefully forms a really hard-cut gem that can last for a long time, right? To put the analogy in there. Being in those environments can be very fun and exciting and exuberating, and it can really crush you. Day in and day out, you're going back to work. Hopefully you're learning, hopefully you're getting better, but you're not going to know that for a long time. And you have to be resilient and stick it out and be tenacious as hell. Because no one's really telling you that you're doing a good job. They're just telling you, they're just not yelling at you. And in some of these instances, and at first you get yelled at a lot and screamed at, and things get thrown at you. And at least that's what it was like 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. These days, I don't know if that happens so much anymore.
Yeah, things have changed for the better. I think people aren't under such harsh conditions anymore. However, harsh conditions yield great things sometimes. I think people are mistaken or misled to think that they are going to be a great chef or a great anything when they're not necessarily. They're going to be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be in any given field. Now, the high stress can yield a high performer, but it can also burn someone out. Not only the person delivering the stress, but the person receiving it, of course. But I think that's kind of lost on today's youth.
Well, yeah, I want to hit on this because it's interesting. It's easy. I think it'd be easy for you and I to generalize and say like all youth are like this. But what we will say is that I think there is an increased focus on how people want to be treated in work, like younger generations, and whether or not that is for all across the whole generation or for a small group, it's hard to say. One of the things that I definitely am seeing, I want to hit 2 points. One is your industry, like fine dining. There seems to be a lot of parallels to high performance culture, like sales, right? And like really high pressure, super high expectations. You either thrive or you don't make it at all. Like there's no kind of middle ground. And also kind of a history of like a challenging lifestyle. Like, we hear a lot about it in sales, like people like working insane hours and developing like really unhealthy habits around alcohol, drugs, like living in excess, very little sleep, all of those things. And I know that exists in your world. So that's one thing I want to come back to. But another thing that I think I want to hit on right now, though, is like the value of a high stress environment. And it's hard to say because from a therapeutic point of view, human beings shouldn't be stressed out. It's for long periods of time. It's not healthy for us.
Right.
However, we actually have a whole system within our psychology that allows us to do that. And if we get really good at that and we get good at tucking into that space and taking care of ourselves, mm-hmm. we can differentiate ourselves and rise to very significant roles. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong about a high stress environment. What I'd say is what's not cool is abuse. Like being abusive is not cool.
No, it isn't. That abuse comes from the abusers typically stressed out. Mm. They've endured the stress for too long and they're burnt out and their fuse is very short and they don't know how to manage themselves. And, they're maybe in their early 30s or whatever. And they're never given the patience themselves as they're coming up.
Well, and so let me add something on there because I agree with that. So we see a lot of like kind of abusive behaviors in high stress environments come from the leaders themselves just being overloaded and they're taking shortcuts. They're giving themselves permission to act in certain ways. So that's part of it. But the other side, think of how you came up, man, in the business or how you came up within your world. And I'll think about how I came up in the coaching world. I experienced like my first job in this world, in the coaching world, was horrifying how people were treated. And I could see people on the left and right of me when they were getting into leadership positions, they viewed it almost as a rite of passage. And that treating people like that was like, well, of course, now I get to do that to someone. It's like almost like hazing when you're in high school, What are your thoughts on that? Like that kind of like leaders being like, well, I was treated like this and I survived and that's what made me strong. Like, what do you think about that around abusive behavior specifically?
You never want to treat someone like you wouldn't want to be treated yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And people are going to take hazing or, abuse differently. And you can't treat everyone the same. You can yell at someone and they're going to love it and they're going to take it and they're going to run with it. You can yell at someone else and they're going to cower in the corner and just shut down. Mm-hmm. Something that I've learned is that before you go to such extremes, you have to know the person that you're going to communicate with. So I might bark at someone, but I know they're going to like take it and run and it's going to get them moving and they're going to be stimulated by it and they're going to come back for more, not in a abusive way, but they're going to come back for more because they're just hungry. Mm-hmm. Not to say that the person who can't take that kind of direction isn't hungry, but they just need to be coached differently. And so as a leader, you got to like learn how to read the room, read the person who's going to receive your feedback or direction. And if it's going to be in a harsh way, you got to be prepared to nurture that person back from their corner. Now, you can't spend all day tiptoeing around people because it's a high stress environment. Things have to get done. Mm-hmm. But you brought this person into your team. You brought this person into your world. You have to give them that respect, knowing that they're not like that other guy who's gonna thrive off of getting quote unquote abused.
Yeah, I want to hit on two things here that I think are really important for people to hear, because it's going to lead me to a third point. The first, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that you and I are both agreeing, like, listen, traditional abusive behaviors that are considered to kind of be like almost hazing in like a high performance world, they got to go. Thing of the past. You cannot do them. Mm-hmm. The inherent power imbalance of someone who's been through it and who chooses to view that as a positive experience is skewed because you have power. And just because you digested something like that in a certain way doesn't mean you have the right to inflict that level of trauma on someone else. So that's what, are we aligned on that?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. The second point that I wanted to hit, though, that I find fascinating, and I really want to dive deep on this with a follow-up, I just want to make sure we're aligned, is that the ability of a leader in high stress environments to be able to be flexible in their leadership style and read the room, read their team, and know who can I apply a little bit more pressure on, who do I have to nurture a little bit more. That ability to be flexible and adaptable in the moment is it's the most valuable and needed skill that someone in a high stress environment, a leader in a high stress environment would have. Is that aligned with what we're saying?
I don't know if it's the most valuable, but it's huge. It helps a lot. You can get people to do anything if you can just speak to them correctly. And you're talking to someone who's just left home for the first time, and they're out in the world by themselves, and they don't have any experience with other people really, in this kind of situation, especially. And you got to know if they can take a certain candor or not. Yeah, you got to get them to perform, because that's your job as a leader.
Yeah. So I've got this guy that I've known for years named Mike Ralla. He was on the podcast before, doing one about learning while leading. And he's just one of those guys that, like, you get that it's a high pressure situation like sales. And he's really honed his ability to kind of approach people differently. And mm-hmm. in these high pressure situations, we see so many people fall into one style of leadership, right? And it's like they just stick to that thing, and that's how they lead. And brings me to a point I want to touch on that you already discussed when you were talking with Patrick, is that, like, it's funny that in high stress environments, these are the people who usually are invested in least by their organization about how to actually lead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's the organization's fault necessarily. I think maybe the organizations as a whole, restaurants and hotels, are learning that it is their fault and that they need to do a better job at nurturing people as leaders. I don't know if it's necessarily their fault, because no one really expected the hotel or restaurant group to create leaders. They expect these places to create dining and hospitality based experiences for the patron, whereas the people in the back are just there in the back. It's got to get done somehow.
Right. So, like, there wasn't this expectation for organizations to do that. And the reason I'm attaching this to sales is, like, I just think of so many great sales leaders that I've met that were like, I just realized at one point I didn't know anything about leading. I just was leading the way that I was led before. And there was some good stuff, but, like, man, I was like being unnecessarily harsh to people, or I was doing stuff that I didn't want to do. I wasn't being who I was. I was just being this caricature of other people who have led me.
Yeah.
Defining your own leadership style in general is like super important, but in a high stress environment, it's so easy to like lean into bad habits to try and get results.
Emotional.
Yeah.
Where in the past where I've been gotten reprimanded orally, I guess you could say verbally abused. I don't really, I'm not traumatized by it. However, one could say it's verbal abuse. That's what you learn. And then you revert back to your primal instincts sometimes, or your very basic emotions when you're under high stress. And it's like you're in this fight or flight situation, and something that was said to you before, or something that you've heard before, comes out of your mouth because it was so simple and it was so actually thoughtless, but it made the most sense at the time. And you react and you don't think, and then there you've made your bed, Yeah. And you could be, that bed can either yield great results, or you're stuck in this hole where before you know it, you're being isolated. You're isolating yourself from others. You're pushing people away. You're not giving them trust anymore. You're not giving them the tools they need to actually succeed. Yes, they got the thing done in a moment, but they don't understand. They don't understand why. You don't understand why, and you're just left with nothing. You're just going to repeat the next day.
So if you were thinking about this, say, I don't want to again speak broadly to the industry, but again, what we've discussed is kind of apparent lack of leadership investment or training in that hospitality industry. Like, what does that expose the industry to? Like, what's the issue for the fine dining industry around that?
I think it exposes the industry to repeat itself. It's a very delicate business model. It's a very poor business model, very slim profit margins, high labor costs. And we're delivering a luxury ingredient or experience. And yes, it's expensive for the patron, but it's not really as expensive as it should be to really capture the true cost of it all. So if we're not developing people as leaders, as true managers, people who really understand how to run the business and how to communicate with people in an effective manner, it's doomed to repeat itself. And we're seeing right now, in this time of COVID pandemic, and the restaurant and hospitality businesses are just devastated right now. And part of that is because there's too many. We were living in a time of excess of a lot of restaurants, a lot of options. Every new town, every whatever is popping up, 5 restaurants within whatever short amount of time, and you get just this blanket or very thin industry, and just too much. And now it's all failing, and the businesses that can survive, they've been forced to look at themselves, to turn into themselves and see what they can actually accomplish as a business, and that starts with their culture. If their culture wasn't strong, they're most likely not going to survive, unless they're, of course, a publicly traded company, but that's a different subject. Yeah, I think that we're doomed to repeat ourselves, and right now we're really seeing our vulnerability in that sense. If a restaurant wasn't able to pivot and deliver in a different business model with to-go or outside dining or what have you, that starts with management. That starts with your leaders. That starts with the culture. And if you don't have a strong culture, then you're probably not doing very well.
Yeah, man. And that's really compelling for me, because like, if your business is essentially just a few figureheads, figureheads maybe not the right term, but you got like a few leaders in an organization, and everyone else is just followers who are held in line through like intensity and like, high performance, but also like deliver result. They're not really viewing themselves as like stewards of a business. Now, if you have strong leaders and those leaders create a culture of leadership and a culture of accountability, then everyone feels that they're a steward of the business and that they want to help the business thrive. And that means if you got to pivot, you don't have a bunch of people holding on to what works for them. It's a bunch of people who are pushing towards what works for the business. But I got to ask you, how do we get to this place? So like, let's say an industry like yours, which has been kind of mired in traditional approaches, how do we make that shift towards increased leadership and accountability, especially in these high stress environments?
Yeah. I think it's a culture of mentorship. It's a culture that appreciates people's livelihood outside of work. How much, it's like how many hours can you work in a day? And we all kind of hold that to each other. Well, I worked 14 hours and they worked only 12. So, what's their deal?
Yeah.
And instead, we should be championing how much time were you able to take off? How well did your team perform when you weren't there? And if your team didn't perform well when you weren't there, then how do we change that? How do we get them to be stewards of this experience when you're not in the room, right? Because everyone acts differently when the boss isn't in the room. I don't know how you can change that, if at all. It's just the reality of animal behavior. When the alpha leader isn't there, the rest of the pack tends to relax a little bit and it tends to do things a little bit differently. But if it's a well-maintained pack, they know that their purpose is to deliver something great, and they'll take pride in that, with or without the leader.
Well, so this is an interesting thing though, right? Because like we're talking about like, oh, instead of taking pride about how like you could like punish yourself more, like I worked 15 hours and I had like an hour of sleep. Like what's wrong with you, you weaklings? Like how come you can't do that? Which again, in the culture of restaurant culture is like traditionally what we hear about all the time, right? And then in sales, you hear that all the time, and a lot of tech stuff. It's like people just brutalizing themselves to get to that next environment. But then, of course, we have the conversations like, well, what if we celebrated the person who took the most time off? That sounds really, really nice. But again, we're talking about like in reality, how do we actually get that to happen?
Yeah. I think it starts with the senior leaders. They've, in this generation, our senior leaders have come up in situations that we were just talking about, the high stress and overworked, underpaid kind of situations. But now they're the senior leaders. They're the owners. They're the chef owners. They're the chef de cuisines. They're the restaurant group owners. The people who are really in charge, people who are in charge of the money. It starts with them. They need to champion their underbosses' time off. They need to take care of their bosses. I'm very fortunate to have worked for the people I've worked for, and very fortunate to have landed my job now because I know my boss champions my well-being, because he knows that I am not going to perform. I'm not going to be able to deliver without it. But not every boss is like that. Not every boss is in the same situation in their own life and see the same values of being away from work. Not every boss has a family or something that they need to take care of outside of work, that they find joy in outside of work. Some bosses are only work still. And, I think it starts at the top.
Okay. So I got to turn the spotlight on you though, man. So like we're talking, you came up in that time of intensity, and I want to say, like, I think there's huge value in having a high intensity environment. So high stress maybe is not the word I'd use, but high intensity, high expectation, you got to execute. And I think that's valuable. And for some industries, that's just it. It's going to be that thing. Like I want people who work in my company to feel like they need to deliver and they need to deliver well. But I also know that I don't need to be brutal about that. There's ways that we can make that happen. So let's focus on you. In your years in the industry, how have you changed and what lessons have you learned?
Okay, so when I was first given or earned or took responsibility, I was following my examples from the past or previous examples, and short-tempered, loud, ill-mannered at times, sarcastic, uncaring, And some of those traits grew as I grew, and I was only able to be more of those things to more people as I went through the ranks. And I'm not that kind of person. I'm not mean. I'm not a cruel person. I'm self-centered. I have many flaws, but I'm not mean. I'm not really that person. But I was being mean at work. I was being mean to people. And I was only doing that because I don't mean to like blame the people who taught me before, like, oh, I'm a product of my environment and all that kind of stuff. Even though I am, it's up to me to hold on to that or let it go, right? You know, I use this as an example. I never burn toast. Why don't I burn toast? Because when I was a young cook, I was toasting some brioche and I burnt some, and we had to redo the whole everything because the toast was late, right? The toast was burnt. So we had to redo things that are time and temperature sensitive to being served. And if we're waiting on toast, okay, everyone knows a mistake is going to happen. Okay. And then you just suck it up and redo it, whatever. It's kind of the nature of service. But then the second time it happens, it's like, what? This is just toast where everyone's waiting on toast. And I think it was the third time where the chef had just had enough. And I was young, right? I was in my early 20s and just like scatterbrained, overwhelmed. And the chef throws it in my face. Just throws the burnt brioche right in my face. And it was shocking and jarring and, a blow to my, I don't know, ego or whatever. And I walked away from that being like, I know it was just toast, but he threw it in my face, and I want to do bad things, right? I'm reverting to my like primal instinct of like being assaulted, right? But you don't. You just swallow it and you move on. But I couldn't help thinking about it for a long time, but that thought stuck with me, and I never made that kind of a simple mistake again. Or if I did, it's like my mission in life to rectify it and never let it happen again. It's that kind of, I use that analogy in this to justify my ill behavior or my shortcomings as a leader, as a poor communicator, as a yeller instead of a talker, a yeller instead of a listener, someone who's depending only on themselves to make everything happen rather than giving the trust to everyone around them to do it, and realizing that's what makes a team. That's what makes things easy. I was always depending on the struggle to push through service and through the day. And so over the years, I've learned to temper that although I still use that burnt toast as an example, because like I said, it should be, you make a simple mistake, but no one's got time for that. So it's your mission in life at that moment to never do that again, to fix that problem real fast, as fast as you can. I use that example still. However, I don't use that to justify my behavior. If I do lose my temper, it's so important to have a conversation on the back end. It's so important to apologize if you do lose your temper. It's so important to understand what happened, why it happened, and that it's never going to happen again. And how do we get to that point? How do we not let this happen again? And that requires communication. That requires talking and not yelling. That requires listening. And it requires understanding of where that person's coming from. You can't just bark at them and shove them into the corner and expect them to come out of that a better person.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a bit for me, like moving from a survive mentality to a thrive mentality. So like, I remember that again, the first coaching role that I took after no longer being a therapist, I made the leap from one industry to another. I remember my boss making this analogy to himself as a boa constrictor. And he essentially just like threatened everyone in the room. Like, I will crush you unless you hit your sales numbers. And like, I'd just come from being a therapist and I was like, oh my God, like what is this horrifying place I work in? And
that's not healthy.
No, it was terrible. And like this guy was so embarrassing as just on every level that I could say. But I will say this, like in the wild, let's just say like we're in like the wild, we're on the street. I would never fear this guy. Like it's just clownish dude. But like in the business world where he had power over me, the power was to fire me, take away, my ability to work, to humiliate me publicly. I was afraid of this guy.
Right.
And there was like kind of a motivating factor to that. But it's the kind of horrible thing that I don't want anyone to experience ever again. And the thing was, I'm going to outsmart and outwork this guy. And I am going to become so good at what I do that he no longer has the ability to do this to me. And I'm going to thrive in this situation. But I had to like kill myself to get there. And it was very unhealthy. I worked crazy, crazy hours and it had all sorts of impacts in my life. Very, very unhappy. And when I got to the mountaintop, and I really was essentially able to like kind of shrug the boa constrictor off this guy. I remember
realizing
thinking like
it was no longer a threat.
Yeah, but the thing that I did was I just made this guy a lot of money. Like I like, yes, I've proved that I'm tough and yes, I could learn stuff, but I just made this guy a lot of money. And the thing was, did my performance increase? Absolutely. Was my ability and skill? Absolutely. But the thing that it didn't do was make me loyal to this guy. And in fact, it's what set me up to start my own company and become like a direct competitor of this dude. And like, I'll never forget that. He brutalized me to the point where I got so good that I could start the competition. And had he been super cool and helped me thrive in a compassionate way, I'd probably still be in that company and we'd be, doing well. But I think anyone can brutalize someone into high performance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to that person whether or not they want to put up with it and if they can survive it. But it takes a special kind of leader to cultivate people up in a compassionate way that also requires that they perform at their highest level in a high stress environment. And that's what I think is the real win for environments like this.
Yeah, that's what I struggle for. That's what I strive for, is to bring people up in a serious way, that we can laugh and talk and stuff like that. But when it really comes down to it, we need to deliver. And I can only show that through my actions. Like, this is how we do this task. Like someone with a lot of experience can. But if they don't perform, they need to, you gotta light the fires sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that brings me to a question around like who you're surrounded with, because, you'd mentioned to Patrick in our prep interview that, in your world, there's the Peter Pan complex is like a real thing. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, I kind of started realizing, I think I was maybe in my late 30s, pushing 40, and everyone around me was still 23, 25. And those are the people who I was surrounded with all the time.
Mm-hmm. Those
are the people I'm conducting daily conversations with, interactions with. And then you put yourself out there in the real world or the non-work world, and people who are your age don't behave like that. They don't think the same way you do. They don't interact the same way you do. They don't have the same candor in their voice or whatever. And I realized that, I think I'm stuck in a youthful, not youthful, but maybe immature situation. And I need to realize that so I can grow out of it and I can grow as a human being. I can't stay 27 my whole life and expect to be a good father and a good husband and a good mentor and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's my when I say Peter Pan complex, for me, that's what it means. That's a level of maturity.
So you got to be able to like be mature as a business person, grow, while also being able to communicate with younger generations, which in your industry, and again, I'm going to make this connection also in the sales industry, you've got like just a constant churn of like young people coming in, and you've got to be able to mature as a person while being able to connect to the youth.
Right. But you want them to be you, right? They need to want to be you because you're the boss. Mm-hmm. They need to want to be you. So who are you going to be for them? Are you going to be their 41-year-old buddy? or you're going to be their boss and their adult, an adult mentor to them. Because if you want to be their buddy, they're going to be your buddy for about a week, and then they're going to move on, and then you've got nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. So this brings me to something I want to hit on towards the end of our interview, but I felt was really important. It was right, we talked about it right at the top. So this industry that you're in, and also any kind of like really high stress environments or high performance environments, they are not known for self-care. And in fact, really high stress environments are not only known for lack of self-care, but they're known for working crazy hours, poor diet, lack of exercise, but also a lot of things to do with like partying and addiction and kind of more like illicit ways of interacting and taking the edge off. So what can you share with us about like what you've observed and what you've gone through, and what you would recommend for people who are leading in environments like this?
Well, yeah, I've seen a lot of different things. I've seen a lot of substance abuse, casually, and some of it turns into something more serious, depending on the person and situation, of course. I've seen it out in the open, white powders from far off countries, things like that. I've never been one to partake in such things, thankfully. I've never had that desire. But I do say I do drink, and personally, I can see it get out of control sometimes, or just go in a way where it's like, you're letting this slip again. You're letting this be a regular thing or too much. And I'm thankful that I have people in my life that don't share that same behavior pattern, that I can easily step away from it. Okay, that's me though. I can easily step away from it. That's not everyone. And this business is just starting to realize that it has a problem. It's a business that's surrounded by alcohol. I mean, that's what we do. It's what we serve. It's in the restaurant. It's in the building. It's always there, always there. And what do we do when we unwind from work? We have a drink. We socialize with drinks. We, as if you want to take it to like a gourmandism, we look to drinks as a sense of culture. Especially if you're in the wine business, if you're a sommelier or a wine professional, wine is your job. It's your life, and it's still alcohol. It can still get out of control, and you can justify that by saying, "I'm only tasting. I only care to drink certain things." But excess can always lead to excess, and at the end of the day, it's a substance, and it has a grip on us whether we like it or not. And it's very hard to control for some people. Now, that's substance abuse. However, I think the physical abuse or emotional abuse, not taking care of yourself physically, simply, right? Yeah. Not eating well, not sleeping enough, overworking yourself. We've already talked about how we can champion time off, and it's really incumbent upon ourselves to take nutrition and self-care into a high regard. I think I was around 35, and I noticed I was becoming pudgy. I mean, you know me, and anyone who's listening who knows me knows that I'm skinny. I've always been skinny, and I'm not saying that I'm overweight or fat or anything like that. I'm not. I'm skinny, but when I was 35, I had just had, my daughter was about 4 years old at that time, more or less 3. So when you have a small child, you don't sleep a whole lot. So I'm working a lot, not sleeping a lot, and not really watching myself nutritionally, because I never really had that inclination, because I was always skinny. That's just my body type. And believe me, I'm not complaining. However, it is still capable. You're still capable of being out of shape with poor nutrition if you are skinny or not. And that was becoming me. And as I was getting older, I started noticing like my body's changing. Okay, well, I don't know if I like that. And I don't know if I was comfortable with that. And I just realized that I needed to take better care of myself. So I started exercising, started running, and I started pushing myself through that. And it's not being an athlete as a young kid or anything like that. I was starting from zero basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I was starting to run and things like that, and like shin splints and going through all the pains, growing pains that I should have gone through when I was in like a teenager. So I went through all that, started running, started lifting weights and taking better account of my nutrition, trying to sleep a little more. I'm still not as good at that as I wish I was, but I definitely try to get the exercise in. As you grow, you realize that self-discipline is the only way you're going to survive. And that reflects on you professionally as well, because if you don't have discipline in your profession, you're not going to do well. And if you let everything slip just because, then, well, you can be, again, left with nothing.
Yeah. And I love what I hear you saying here. And it's really been a through line through our whole conversation is like personal accountability. Like, listen, like if you're working in a high stress environment, and I'm not saying, actually, I've said the opposite. Being stressed out is not good for people. However, human beings can totally survive in stressful situations if you know how to take care of yourself. And taking care of yourself is the key. But like how you lead, how you show up, how you engage, the kind of culture you build, and also how you take care of yourself physically, mentally, and just from like a perspective of like what you put in your body in terms of alcohol or drugs, it all boils down to discipline. The whole through line is performance culture requires discipline, discipline of thought, discipline of action, discipline of intention, discipline of leadership. And if you have those things and you have a strategy about how you're going to do it, you're going to thrive. I mean, your business might not be successful, but you as an individual and the team you lead is going to survive.
Yeah, thrive, even in part, if you have just a little bit of that, you're going to do far better. You just have a little bit of discipline in any of those ways that you mentioned. You're going to do so much better. You're going to be happier. You're going to be healthier. All of that feeds into each other. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I've got a couple questions left for you here. So fun question first, and then we'll pass it back over to you for a close off here. So, you and I know each other through the punk and hardcore scene. I know you came up in the Southern California, hardcore scene, straight edge scene. What is one band and one song from that band that could bring you out of mosh retirement?
Oh man, bringing me out of get me moving. So the last band,
not just get you moving, man. Get you either stage diving or moshing or both.
I hear you. Oh man, if we ever get back to having live shows and I get a chance to see Sick of It All again, which I know I will because they're one of the hardest working bands on the planet, and they'll be back as soon as they can. Clobbering Time.
Oh God, yes, absolutely. Okay, what an answer for anyone listening who didn't grow up with the punk and hardcore scene. Sick of It All. It's Clobbering Time. I dare you to listen to that song and not at least move a little bit in your seat, let alone bust out a stage dive off of the top of your desk onto your child. All right, last question.
No lyrics, just pure aggression.
Just pure aggression. Just power, man. Absolutely. And from one of the all-time greats. Okay, last question for you. Man, you've had a storied career. You've done a lot of cool things, and it's been cool watching from the sidelines as you've gone into your career. And I love that you reached out about doing this podcast. I've learned a lot. It's been great to hear you. Anything you want to leave with our audience around leadership and accountability in high stress environments, like how to lead and be in that space?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the same, likewise for me, watching you and, through all your touring with, and it's success with Champion and subsequent bands afterwards, Betrayed and everything, it's just been really rad. Seeing you on stage all over the world. It's just been so cool. And then starting your own business and stuff like that. And well, what's this thing Aram's doing? He's got a podcast now and can listen to your thoughts on everything. It's just been really cool. Again, from the sidelines to see that happening. Likewise. Something I'd like to leave with everyone as far as leadership and accountability. I think your team has to know that you have their back. It is 100% okay to fail and to make mistakes. But if you fail and you feel like you're all alone in your failure, then you're not going to grow from that. If you fail and your leader says, okay, that is a failure. This is how we get out of that. This is how you understand that. This is how you get better. And this is how I can help you. This is where I failed as a leader. You failed because I failed, right? You failed because you didn't have the tools or the information to do this task correctly. If that employee knows that the leader has their back in that sense, then they'll learn. Both sides will learn. Everyone will learn, and everyone will be better, and you will not repeat the same stuff over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And if I was to say, I think that's a way that we can transition from being in a high stress environment to a high performance environment. Like, the expectation is performance, but it doesn't have to be a terrible stress bomb all the time.
No.
Yeah. Right on, man. Beautifully said. All right, everyone. I'm going to see you in the outro, Baruch. Thank you so much, man. I just got to say, as a friend, I love you. I feel so excited that we were able to reconnect on this. It's been far too long. You're a great person, and congratulations on all your success. And everybody, something to consider here is, like, whatever industry you're in, there are lessons that you can bring to other industries. And this was such a cool and interesting snapshot into yours. All right, everyone, let's hit the outro. Dave, drop the beat. Thanks, Baruch, for being on the show. And that was a great conversation. You know, the thing about stress in a workplace, I mean, it's the reality for most of us. And sometimes we have a little stress, and sometimes we have super high stress. But I could say most of us aren't used to really operating in super constant high stress environments. And, you know, stress isn't great for us, but if we learn how to manage it and really take care of ourselves, we should be able to actually thrive in almost any kind of setting. You know, Baruch is a great example of a leader who has had to be very self-reflective and hold up the mirror so that he can get better and better in not just taking care of himself, but taking care of the people around him. So many great lessons that I believe all of us can apply to our lives. As we're closing off, I want to remind everyone we're produced by Patrick McKechnie. We're edited by Dave Larson, and our design is done by Tammy Levy. Again, I'm your host, Aram Arslanian, and this has been One Step Beyond. One